following video will contain content meant for mature audiences, so if I hear you laugh at the word booty once, I'm afraid you'll have to leave. Hey everybody, this is TUSDarryl and welcome to my review of Newcomer to the Horror Game Library, The Medium, where you get to experience the world through the eyes of a medium named Marianne, as she searches for answers as to where her mysterious powers came from, as well as answers for what tragedy occurred at Niwa Hotel. So if you're ready to get down and spooky, I'm so sorry. Then let's get started with the graphics. I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way and say that the footage you are seeing right now is the game running on low graphics. And even on low graphics, it's a gorgeous game. That said, there are some performance issues that can occur if your computer isn't up to snuff to handle the dual reality gameplay. I'll get to more of that later. That said, if you have the game already, tell me how it runs on Xbox Series X. I'm genuinely curious because my computer is long overdue for an upgrade. But at the time of this recording, the graphics card I want is out of stock, and you know how it is. Anyway, the game oozes atmosphere, and though it isn't super scary, it's definitely unsettling. So, kudos to you on that, Bloober. Kudos indeed. Let's talk about the sound. The medium lets the ambience do most of the talking, with the exception of other characters being in the scene. There also aren't any enemies in the game outside of 3. And even then, only one shows up consistently. So besides the excellent sounds that make up each creature, the game's sound primarily comes from the environment, falling apart, objects, skin specifically, ripping and tearing until it's done, ripping and tearing at the seams, as well as several other sounds that'll get the jump on you if you're not on your toes. Speaking of toes, get ready to tap yours when you hear some of the music in the game. Akira Yamaoka co-composed for the Medium soundtrack. So if things sound a little Silent Hill-ish, that's why. The music is minimal for a lot of the game, but there are some standout tracks that appear at the beginning and at the end of the game. It's good listening, so be sure to keep an ear out for it. Now, onto the bread and butter of the Medium, the gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, the Medium features what Bloober calls dual reality gameplay, which is essentially 2 game spaces running at the same time on the screen, in moments where Marianne is interacting with the other world. This is typically used for puzzle solving as well as for getting around obstacles with her defensive abilities or out-of-body experiences where she can temporarily detach from her mortal form and wander about before having to return to it. As you can see, this is not a combat-focused game. In fact, the most interaction you'll be having with enemies in the game is using stealth to get by them so you're not one-shot the moment they spot you and catch you. It can be annoying sometimes, but thankfully the game has a great checkpoint system to keep you from having to start all the way over from the beginning of a section. This is also a very linear game without much extra stuff to do outside of being nosy and looking for memos to collect. The game also features fixed and panning cameras from various locations throughout the game, so if that is a turnoff for you, then maybe think twice about this game if you're interested in it. There aren't any tank controls though, so that's great if you hate them or dislike them. Personally, I like tank controls, but I know for this kind of game, it wouldn't have worked out very well with the stealth. I'm sure there are other reasons that went into that decision, but I think that's one of them. If it even came up on the table at all, I don't know. I see fixed camera angles or whatever in a horror game, and I expect either tank controls or full 360 controls or tank controls with a dedicated run button that just puts you in a straight direction like in, say, Fatal Frame, but I can talk about Fatal Frame a different day at a different time. One criticism I have immediately with the gameplay is that once you figure out the gameplay loop, you'll realize how repetitive the game can get. There are puzzles in the game and some narrative events that happen that add some other elements, but ultimately you'll be doing the same thing over and over again in close succession. And even then, the puzzles are too simple, and the elements I refer to that are introduced, they aren't impactful. They are to the narrative, but not to the gameplay. I feel like it could have benefited from having one of the enemies in the game, like, say, the Maw, be a consistent threat and presence in Niwa Hotel, similar to the likes of Mr. X or any stalker enemy you've encountered in Clock Tower or Haunting Ground if you played Haunting Ground, rather than scripted sequences where they just kind of limit him there. Because for me, the moments that involved him were the best. Overall, I would have liked more variety in the gameplay and some more difficulty in the puzzles. It's clear that this is a more narrative-focused game, and that's what kept me going, despite the disappointing ending, but there just isn't enough there for me to necessarily say that the gameplay is enticing or a lot of fun. Because again, the most fun I've had in the game were the moments where I had to figure out how to get around the Maw. Even though that part is also kind of not narrative, that part is also kind of linear too. But even then, it's still something. I just feel like it could have used more oomph. And as for the dual reality feature, it's great for cutscenes and makes for some innovative gameplay initially, until you get used to it and again the repetition kicks in. But the game doesn't do enough with it to really take it to the next level. Anyway, before I get to my final verdict, I'm going to bring up one bug I did encounter in the game. I encountered a collision bug during one of the later portions of the game that was kind of annoying. Essentially, I wanted to see if I could squeeze past something, but when I realized I couldn't wiggle myself out from between two objects. If I used the out-of-body experience ability, the spirit version of Marianne could get out. But that won't save her actual body, so I ended up having to reload a save, which, by the way, the game is strictly autosave based. That would typically be a problem for me, but the game is so short and linear and the checkpoints are so good that it didn't bother me too much. Anyway, let's wrap this review up. As much as it hurts me, I'm going to have to give this game a caution. If you have Xbox Game Pass, I'd say give it a whirl since it's basically free there, but otherwise I wouldn't recommend spending $50 on this. It's not full price, but that's still $50. Maybe when it's on sale for $10 or $20, I'd say give it a shot, but there's not enough here for me to give it a full recommendation. That said, I wouldn't say this game isn't worth getting. It's just very meh. Not fantastic, not terrible, just average. It's just there. And I hate that. I hate that I have to say that because this game has a lot of potential in many different places, but I can't give a review based on potential. You know how this is. This game can be best described as a meal that almost hits the spot, or a song that almost makes you want to dance, but then they lose you. Ultimately, it just doesn't satisfy. What it did successfully do is make me want to play some of the horror games in my backlog that I haven't gotten to yet, like Dread Out 2 and whatnot. Maybe I'll actually do a full playthrough of Haunting Ground or something like that. So I guess that's a plus. The first 4 hours of the game are where I'd say it's at its best. It starts with a slow burn for an hour, then slowly introduces you to the world and whatnot for the next hour. Then eventually you get to meet the Maw. He has a great smile. Sort of. And all of that pacing just works out so well for me. But after that, the next 4 hours are a slog, with some interesting bits, but again, those interesting bits don't quite hit the spot. It's a miss a majority of the time. It doesn't help that the game is roughly 8 hours long too, so only half the game is actually interesting, and dare I say fun to play. And the other half feels like it's trying too hard to do too much with so little. That said, the medium's gameplay style wouldn't have served well for a 10+ hour game. So, ironically, I'm thankful for how short it was. With all of that said, I do hope that if they make another game, whatever they want to call it, you know how games are these days. Sometimes you get a number, sometimes you get a subtitle, sometimes you get a completely different name. I just hope they flesh out the gameplay some more, because there are a lot of good ideas here that can work really well if they expand on them. I'm not bothered by it being an adventure game. Well, adventure horror game, I guess. Nor was I one of the people who thought it would be on par with Silent Hill or any of the big, legendary horror games out there. But I did expect it to do more than it did, and that's where my disappointment lies. But if you were to ask me if I'd be interested in a sequel, if they were to address at least half of the repetitive nature with it and throw that stuff out the window and introduce some other gameplay elements in its place, I'd say yes. Yes, I would be. And with that, I hope you guys have enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll see you guys later.
Once more, I step